Have you ever wondered how chasing the American dream could leave you in financial ruin? Imagine starting your adult life full of hope, ready to build a future, but instead, you find yourself buried under mountains of debt. Not because you bought a luxury car or a house you couldn't afford, but because you went to college. In America today, more than 45 million people are trapped in student loan debt. That's 1 out of every 5 adults. Together, they owe more than $1.7 trillion. This is more than all the credit card debt in the country. More than auto loans. It's a number so large that it's almost impossible to imagine. But behind that massive number, there are real people living real nightmares. People like Sarah. She borrowed $45,000 to pay for her nursing degree. 10 years later, after making consistent payments every month, she owes over $60,000. How? Because of interest capitalization. Because of delayed payments that added penalties she didn't even understand. Because the system was never designed to help her succeed. Or Jason, a military veteran who believed that serving his country would earn him the right to higher education. After graduating, he discovered that his private loans didn't qualify for forgiveness. He now works 2 jobs just to keep up with the interest. Their stories are not unique. They are everywhere. But how did we get here? To understand the student loan crisis, we need to go back to the 1950s. Back then, higher education was affordable. Public universities charged very little, and most students worked part-time jobs to cover tuition. But in the 1980s and 90s, everything changed. States began cutting funding for universities. Colleges raised their tuition to compensate. Banks saw an opportunity, and soon, the federal government and private lenders began flooding the market with student loans. At first, it seemed like a good thing. Loans opened doors to millions of students who might otherwise not afford college. But slowly, the trap was set. Because tuition kept rising, and rising, and rising. In 1970, the average annual tuition at a public college was around $500. Today, that number is closer to $10,000 per year, and much higher for private institutions. Adjusted for inflation, college costs have grown nearly 300% over the past 4 decades. Meanwhile, wages have remained stagnant. And so, millions of Americans have been forced to borrow more and more, just to get a degree that's supposed to help them succeed. But the system doesn't stop at tuition. There's also interest. And fees. And penalties. Most borrowers don't realize that when they defer payments or enter forbearance, interest keeps growing. That unpaid interest is often added to the principal balance, meaning they begin paying interest on top of interest. It's called capitalization. And it's how a $40,000 loan can turn into a $70,000 nightmare. Now, imagine this happening to millions of people at once. It's not an accident. It's a design. The student loan system isn't broken. It's working exactly as intended. For the lenders. And so, what began as a tool for opportunity has transformed into a machine of debt. A machine that's devouring an entire generation. In the next part of this documentary, we'll explore real stories, real numbers, and explain why many Americans may never escape this system. Pause. Music transition. Let's talk about the human cost. Millions of borrowers today delay milestones most people take for granted. They put off buying homes. They postpone having children. Some avoid marriage, not because they don't want to, but because they fear sharing their debt with a partner. And the emotional toll is just as real. Anxiety, depression, a constant sense of failure. Many borrowers describe their loans as a shadow that follows them everywhere. What's worse, most borrowers believe it's their fault. That they made a mistake. But the truth is, they were set up. From the age of 18, students are encouraged to take on tens of thousands in debt, with little financial education, and without understanding the long-term consequences. It's the only type of loan in America where an 18-year-old with no credit history can borrow huge sums without collateral or cosigner. It's also one of the few debts that can't be discharged in bankruptcy. Think about that. You can erase credit card debt in bankruptcy. You can erase medical bills, even gambling debts. But not student loans. That protection is by design, created by decades of legislation pushed by banks and lenders. And so the cycle continues. Borrowers pay, and pay, and pay, and their balances grow. And behind the scenes, loan servicers profit from every mistake. Now, let's pull back the curtain on loan servicers. These companies, the middlemen between borrowers and the Department of Education, are supposed to help manage repayment. But in reality, many of them profit from borrower confusion. How? By steering borrowers into forbearance instead of income-driven repayment plans. By misplacing paperwork. By failing to inform borrowers about forgiveness programs. Take Navient, for example. In 2022, they settled lawsuits after being accused of pushing struggling borrowers into costly forbearances, instead of guiding them toward cheaper options. Why? Because forbearance requires no paperwork and is easier to process, and because loan servicers get paid for every account they manage, regardless of whether borrowers succeed. It's a system designed for administrative efficiency, not borrower success. Even public service loan forgiveness, a program designed to help teachers, nurses, and public workers, has failed. In its early years, over 98% of applicants were denied. Why? Because servicers failed to correctly process employment certifications or because borrowers were misled about program requirements. Stories flood social media. Borrowers working public service jobs for a decade, only to find their payments didn't count due to clerical errors. Forgiveness denied, lives upended. And yet, very little accountability. For most borrowers, the first time they realize something is wrong is when their expected forgiveness is denied. By then, it's too late. But there is hope. Recent reforms, like the Biden-Harris Save Plan, aim to simplify repayment and reduce monthly costs. For some, it offers a path to forgiveness after 10 or 20 years, depending on their balance. But the question remains: will servicers implement these changes correctly? Will borrowers receive the forgiveness they're promised? Time will tell. Meanwhile, what can you, the borrower, do? First, document everything. Keep digital copies of every payment, every email, every form. Next, file complaints with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This forces servicers to respond officially. Third, recertify your income-driven repayment plan every year, early and in writing. And finally, know your rights. Because while the system may be rigged, knowledge is power. The student loan crisis has crippled millions. But awareness is the first step to change. And change is possible. Every borrower who speaks up adds pressure. Every story shared exposes the cracks. If you're watching this, know you're not alone. You're part of a generation trapped by a system designed to exploit. But together, we can expose it. This is Student Loan Hell. Share this video. Subscribe for more real stories and resources. And remember, it's not your fault. It's their system.